So a few years ago, one of the most formative mentors I've ever had said, mind where you're going, otherwise you'll end up where you're heading. And this sums up extremely succinctly and beautifully what most people are going through right now, especially the clients that I work with one-on-one, as well as what happened in my journey as well. This is when you know what you should be doing, but you're not doing it. Or to put it more accurately, you're doing 80% of what you should be doing, but it's the last 20% which you just can't seem to change. And it's in that last 20% that the real fulfillment and happiness and inspiration will unlock. And what's most likely happening is if things are a little uncomfortable or internally scary, there is internal tension that comes up, especially when it's my choice whether I do the thing or I don't. These are the exact words of one of my clients, Dave, and it essentially sums up why we're not doing the thing, why we're listening to the loudest voice rather than the wisest, why we're allowing ourselves to just be reactive rather than responding to what we actually need to do. Because whenever there's that last 20% to push, there's internal tension. Whenever there's internal tension, there's resistance. Whenever there's resistance, there's an opportunity to grow or there's an opportunity to shy away. Most people take the second and it eats away at them because they know that just over this little bit of discomfort, this little bit of resistance is what they need to grow. I'm not talking about the people that aren't doing anything. I'm talking about the people that, like I said, are 80% of the way there, but it's the last 20% that they can't just seem to unlock. Whether that's in relationships, socializing, showing up in the workplace, or just feeling more inspired and fulfilled in life in general. I definitely used to take the second. When I was in class in school, I used to not speak up. When I wanted to go and talk to a woman that I was interested, I wouldn't, and somebody else would take the opportunity to. Or even when it came to doing something boring, like sitting down and actually figuring out what I wanted to do in life. I was so reactive to what others kind of wanted me to do that I was just being pulled in so many different directions. Because the loudest voice, which wanted the most comfort, that wanted the most homeostasis, was the one that felt most comfortable listening what other people thought I should do. And that just made me start living the life of what other people wanted me to do rather than what I actually wanted to do. And here is the most practical framework that I have discovered on this journey of almost a decade that stopped me from just listening and going with the flow of the loudest and actually start listening to the wisest voice inside of me. And this framework is a framework called the path of most resistance. It originally comes from some masculine polarity frameworks. I believe David Data, but it was taught to me by my mentor, Pierre. And it's extremely simple. And most people listening to this will, because it's so simple, think that it's something that it's so easy to do. But in reality, what it is it's something that most people avoid doing. And it's why that we can go into homeostasis, why we can go into relaxation, why we can just take time off even though we know that we should be doing something else. This is the thing that stops that. And it's whatever's the most difficult, whatever's the most boring, whatever's the most intimidating. So whatever the most difficult is difficult in terms of complexity. Difficult in terms of this is actually hard to understand. So this is a using your brain kind of difficult. This isn't an intimidating difficult. This will make you do the hard research that no one else wants to do. This will make you put in the hours. Like let's say you're wanting to be a founder. That's a very complex thing to start. And that's a difficult thing to start. But it's also the path of most resistance if you want to change something new. The way that we're set up in this world is to not naturally be an entrepreneur, is to kind of work in the system. I'm not saying the system is good or bad, but that's kind of how it's set up, at least in the UK. You go to university, you get a good job, you fall into that system. It takes a lot of difficulty and the complexity of thought to be able to change that. And there's so many hoops that you have to go through, there's so much red tape that you have to go through, that is the path of most resistance. Whatever's the most boring, this is meditation practices, this is shadow work practices that aren't nothing necessarily is happening. This is watching content which you know is good for you, but is not necessarily the most engaging. So getting away from all the clickbait stuff, getting away from all the fast cuts, fast edits, and all that kind of stuff to actually just listening to the things that you know are going to move the needle. And that's up to you to decide what that is. And then the last one is whatever is the most challenging or whatever is the most intimidating. This is something which you're actively afraid of. So for me, when I was doing jiu-jitsu, this was doing competitions. When I was getting out there and being more social, this was actually about talking to women that I was interested in, or being in social situations that I would otherwise feel stifled in, such as being in groups, being in really chaotic environments, putting myself out there when I was around close friends. That was a really weird trigger for me, actually. When I was around close friends and people that knew me, I wouldn't like to put myself out there fully. I wouldn't like to, let's say if there was somebody I was interested in the environment, I wouldn't like to go and hit on that woman in front of my friends. Or I wouldn't want to go into a situation where I could make a fool of myself, because for whatever reason, I was making it so that my close friends had a trigger. I had a trigger around them. I think it was something to do with the fact that they could see me for who I am, or something like that, right? This is the framework. Right here is the antidote to letting the loudest voice win. Whether that loudest voice is making you procrastinate, whether that loudest voice is making you go and do a bad habit like watching porn or nicotine or drinking too much alcohol. Whether that loudest voice is saying, oh, we don't need to develop our social confidence. Let's just get drunk, or let's just take some MDMA, or let's just do anything like that at the party, and then we can let that do the heavy lifting for us, right? This right here encourages a different kind of listening. Most people, and maybe for you who are listening to this, they have just such a habit and so much habitual tendency, so much karma, if we want to use that word, of always listening to whatever's coming up first in their environment. Oh, I want to have some pleasure. Let me go and eat this thing. Let me go and have a hit of nicotine. Let me go and watch porn, right? Let me go and hit up my ex, even though I know she's not good for me. But there's so much more happening inside of you than that. And what this framework does is it gives you a real practical, conscious level framework to begin to filter those voices and listen to what's actually happening inside of you. Because what you'll find when you do this practice is you do have a voice that gets excited when you want to do the most difficult thing. You do have a voice that gets excited whenever you want to do the most boring thing. That gets inspired whenever you're about to do something intimidating, because that's when courage comes up. That's when the ego state of courage will come out. And the more you listen to something, the more you give something your loving attention, the more it has space to grow. The more it has space to become just a part of your daily routine, your daily voices that you listen to. The stronger that becomes, and the more the other voices atrophy. This right here is the most practical framework that I've ever seen in encouraging that. Okay? When I integrated this, my life completely changed, because I was no longer listening to the loudest voice, the one that was encouraging homeostasis, the one that was encouraging comfortability, the one that didn't like change. What this framework did is it gave me the excuse to actually listen to the other things. Because one of the things that's happening, most likely, if you're always letting the loudest voice win, is there's like too little of a reaction time. So like you listen to the voice, or you're listening and you're doing whatever, and then that loud voice comes up and boom, you just follow it. What this does is it encourages you to take your time and to listen to see if there's anything else. Listen to see if there's that bad aftertaste that comes with that voice. That you know, like, oh, should I really be doing this? That's what we're doing here. So when I integrated this, I cultivated the other voices. And they became stronger in me. And then eventually, they became the things that were easiest to follow rather than the harder ones to follow, because they became the loudest voice. The wisest voice became the loudest voice. Now, that isn't always going to be the case, but this is a really, really good place to have that happen, let's say 80 or 90% of the time. That's what happened with me. What it also does is it notifies you that you do have voices of courage within you. You do have voices of wanting to take on the challenge. You do have voices of being that guy within you. And it's actually quite surprising. It was surprising to me when I first done this. I thought that, because you can buy into so many storylines, especially when you're really harsh on yourself. That's why I made the video about how to stop downward spirals with the unconditional loving witness. I really highly recommend you to go check that out. But when we're really harsh on ourselves, little triggers become really massive triggers. Is the simple version of what that video is about. Because you make a small thing into a big deal because of how you treat yourself. And the reason why that's relevant here is because if we spent years of doing that, maybe even decades, then we can have all of these beliefs and all of these perspectives and views about ourselves that we are just a pussy, or we're a coward, or we're just not cut out for it, or we just stay the same and we can't change. But when you start doing this and implementing this framework, you start to realize that you actually have more than just one voice inside of you. And that, for me, was one of my most powerful liberating forces I've ever had. Realizing that I did have a bit more of a gamer inside of me, right? Someone who loved just going through the grind and all that kind of stuff. And that's really valuable for a lot of my clients as well. So for example, one of my clients, we'll call him Dave. He worked with all of the mentors. He worked with people who did reparenting, some hypnotherapists, some more kind of Hindu spiritual practices, all of the kind of internal work stuff. He went through the ringer. And they actually done some quite good work. You know, he was more secure. He had a much better understanding of himself. He was able to be quite fluent on the inside, right? But what the problem was is that it wasn't very practical. He didn't actually change that much externally. He was able to have all this fluency and be able to see and understand all of his patterns, but they didn't actually get him anywhere. For instance, in all of that time that he was working with his other mentors, maybe 2 or 3 years, he kind of had this idea that he wanted to do something, but he didn't know what it was because he just exited tech. He didn't have to work for a few years. He was traveling around that time, just kind of chilling out and waiting for the next stage. And amongst other things, like with the deep unconscious shadow work, which is a bit more targeted than I've seen in other places and other conscious coaching, this framework was the thing that took him from A to Z. Because during that period, he still was very socially stifled, wasn't really dating, had trap blocks around dating, and he didn't have any money source, and he didn't know what he wanted to do, and he knew he didn't want to go back into the tech world, but he didn't really have the drive or the agentiveness, the activeness to actually go and pursue something else. So we implemented this framework, and now he's able to go on dates and be very social with women that he would have been scared to go and talk to just a few months ago. And it took him from being jobless for this whole 2 or 3 year time period to being a founder in his own company, in his own startup. And now he's able to live the life that he wants to live without all this kind of like this sword of Damocles hovering over his shoulder, tapping him on the shoulder and being like, hey, what's the next move? And this was because he stopped listening to the loudest voice. For him, his loudest voice was the voice which was like, oh, let's just chill. I didn't really like the going after the grinding and that kind of stuff because it didn't make me any happy. Making that money didn't really make me any happy. Let me just stay and chill at my parents' house and figure out what I want to do. And I really listen to what my inspiration is. And that voice has a place, but when it's the loudest and it's not letting any other voice come into that space, it's actually being a bully. And I would have fallen into that a lot of the time if I didn't have this practice. This is the practice that enabled me to go to Thailand with only 300 euro a month to my name in order to start what I'm doing now as a way to kind of symbolically burn the boats. It was why I quit everything to go and train jiu-jitsu and then quit jiu-jitsu to go and live with my mentors for 2.5 years. It was because I followed this practice rigorously. You don't have to do the same things that I do. Remember, the contents is largely irrelevant. Instead, you just have to listen to what is already inside of you. And that is the way that you can break free of the patterns that you're experiencing right now. Whether it's bad habits, whether it's procrastination, whether it's self-sabotage, whether it's insecurities holding you back from doing what you actually want to do. Just like me and Dave that I spoke about, there is a way to break free, and it's by implementing this. So just quick action protocols. How you do this is you split your life into these 3 parts, whatever's the most difficult, whatever's the most boring, whatever's the most intimidating. And for each of those points, maximum you want to put 3 tasks. Less is more that you can do. And those tasks and those principles are all geared towards what you actually want in life. So you have to be like, okay, what do I actually want? So you have to put a grand strategy there of a North Star of where you want to go. And if you're having trouble with that, then all you start off with is you list everything that you don't want to do. If you do that, you look into 3 to 6 months, you will have incredible change in your life, just like me and my clients do. But don't take our word for it. Actually go out and practice it. And when it comes to insecurities and shadow, you have my free practical guide to shadow work, which is in the link below and in the comment below. That will get you through any really, really tough situations where you really have a bad insecurity holding you back, or you really have a tough ingrained habit that you need to break. That's the thing that's going to help you there. But otherwise, this is a real showing up practice. This was us actually going out into the world and letting the chips fall as they may. Go ahead and embrace it, and you will change.